Hello, Horn Camp listeners. I am Nikki Labonte, the Associate Operations Director of Candlebets Horn Camp, and I am here today with Stasia Siena. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Nikki. I'm fine. I'm good. How are you?
I am good. It's so good
Hey.
to talk to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Welcome.
Oh, yay. So can you start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where are you from, and describe yourself in the context of the horn and music and Alexander technique realm, if that's possible.
Oh, sure. Yes. In a short, yes. In one sentence or less, right?
10 words or less. Go ahead.
What was the question? No. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Yeah. I'm originally from Indiana, Midwestern girl, grew
Nice.
up near Lake Michigan, and now I live in Champaign, Illinois. And I've been teaching, so I teach the Alexander technique at KPHC, which is a great privilege. Love it, love it. And I've been teaching the Alexander technique for about 20 years. So it's kind of what brought me to Champaign. I was not expecting to find myself here 20 years later, but it's been really wonderful to really plant roots here. So the part about describing myself, yeah, within the Alexander technique world. So I'm a pretty specialized AT teacher. So I have students from all walks of life, and I've had, kind of the full gamut of private students and done a lot of university teaching and kind of teaching both here in the States and abroad. But pretty early on, I started specializing in work with musicians. So it's really what connects me to KBHC. And though I'm not a horn player, Nikki, as you know, I was trained as an opera singer originally. So it was kind of a natural fit.
That is amazing. So I want to first start off. Can you tell me what Alexander technique is in 10 words or less? No, just kidding.
Right, I know, right?
What it is, just in general, and then I want to get into, later, like how you got involved in it and how you figured out what it was. But first, just so everyone's on the same page, what is Alexander technique?
Right. I mean, it's a really good question. And in fact, we could probably spend 20 minutes just talking about that. So I will try to really distill it down to some really sort of specific points. So in the most general sense, it's about how we begin to recognize our postural habits and our movement patterns. And so the technique has to do with awareness. So increasing our awareness, our what we call kinesthetic sense of both how we are in our bodies and how our bodies move through space. So, there are lots of ways that we can get at that. And very often, the Alexander technique is synonymous with posture. So on the one hand, it is, right? So how long are we? How wide are we? How do we keep ourselves sort of in a good alignment? But the Alexander technique is really so much more than that, because we're moving bodies. So it's functionally, how do we move in these bodies and retain elements of efficiency, of poise, of freedom, of ease, and cultivate that pattern to just become more and more refined over time.
Wow, that is amazing. I thought I knew what Alexander technique was, but I didn't realize it was that wide reaching. I mean, that much of it feels like almost all encompassing.
It's funny because I do say often when I give master classes, I say it's the user's manual you never got, right?
Yeah.
It can seem very esoteric, and it's not. The Alexander technique is a very nuts and bolts method for kind of getting at how we are in our bodies and how we use them most efficiently, which of course is super important for a musician, for a horn player, for all musicians. Yeah.
So you started out your training as an opera singer, and then somewhere along the line, did you find this technique? Were you always aware of it? Talk about how you got involved in it, how you discovered it.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, of course, the first thing that came to mind was, it found me, because I certainly wasn't looking for it when the Alexander technique kind of was dropped in my lap. And Really, it started when I did my undergrad at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And during that time, I mean, I was always singing, and I was involved with music, but not as much as I was then when I went on to graduate school in Indiana and I was studying voice. So my teacher at Indiana, she was always having some technical issues in my vocal technique, and she suggested it actually. So I had never heard of the Alexander technique. I had no idea what she was talking about. And so kind of a pretty familiar story that some musicians go through. I started reading about it and sought out a teacher, and then began commuting because, strangely enough, one of the largest music schools in the country, but there was no Alexander technique teacher in Bloomington, Indiana when I was a student there. So I went over to Columbus, Ohio, and started studying, and really saw the benefits immediately, started working through some of the issues that I was having with my own technique, and had no intention whatsoever of becoming a teacher. It just was, I don't know that you know this about me, but I had a very bad car accident in the process. So right at kind of the end of my graduate school career, I had a debilitating car accident, and I have an underlying condition called scoliosis, which curvature of the spine. So it was a pretty serious accident, and I had some big things to overcome. And I kept coming back to the Alexander technique in the rehabilitation of that, and found my way to a teacher training course, and wound up becoming a teacher. So it really started as just a way to refine my vocal technique, and has really become a way of life over time.
Wow. So
Yeah.
at what moment in that stage did you decide that this is something, originally was kind of a means to an end, I guess, of, okay, I want to improve these technical things. And then at some point it became the end. So at what point was there a moment that happened where you were like, this is it? Or was it just more of a gradual transformation?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because you actually bring up a point that's very Alexandrian, right? So we talk about, instead of a means to an end, we talk about the means whereby. So there's this idea of achieving a goal. And so there's a lot of lingo in the Alexander technique, and sort of its own language, because you're talking about change, which is new territory. So the idea that that the important part is discovering the means whereby we achieve something, as opposed to fixating on the goal out here and being so intent upon the goal that we are not fully aware of the means whereby. So it's a very relevant, your question is great, actually, because there was both the moment, and yes, really good question. I know that you don't have a lot of experience with the technique, but it's a perfect question to ask. It's really great. So on the one hand, it really became it for me back even when I was a student. I began to realize that the way forward as a singer was actually through greater self-discovery. That really uncovering, not only adding things on, learning what to do, it was so important to learn what not to do. And the Alexander technique is really about, as we look at our habits, oftentimes Alexander would say it's the unpeeling of the onion, not the best metaphor perhaps, but the idea being that sometimes it's unraveling the habits that are getting in our way. So of breath, perhaps, of our energy, of our efficient use of ourselves. So as a student, I already had an inkling, but I really sort of changed my life's path. I was teaching voice and the Alexander technique at Millikan University in Decatur. And I really discovered that I really felt my students were improving primarily through their Alexander technique work. And I really saw that it was that emphasis and focus that was really my life's work, was to bring that more and more to musicians, to help find this missing link. Because of course, the body the human playing the instrument is part of the experience. They're just inseparable. They're inextricably linked.
Mm.
So it became absolutely clear to me that focusing on the principles of the Alexander technique would improve and refine the artistry for those musicians that were lucky enough to have lessons, to learn. And so I really started kind of focusing mainly on teaching the technique.
That is really cool. And I kind of want to segue into, you know, you just mentioned that music is so linked to the art of performing music is so linked to an awareness of one's like self and
Oh,
body.
right, absolutely, right.
And so how, when you teach classes at Kendall Betts or anywhere, what do you focus on? Is there an aspect that you focus on in particular with musicians? What are like the key things that you are hoping that musicians gain out of work with the Alexander technique?
Right. Well, first of all, I really want to credit our artistic director, Bernard Scully, for having the vision to incorporate Alexander technique into the core curriculum. It was a bold move, and it was a really beneficial move for our participants, because in making it a core part of the curriculum, the old saying, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know that the Alexander technique can be really the key to one's discovery and development as an artist, you might not take advantage of it because it's not something that you're familiar with. So what I do at Kendall Betts, we both have group classes and individual lessons, which is really wonderful for our participants. So partly what I do in group lessons, so in our group classes that just kind of run by the clock, so a certain amount of time, I'll come to those with themes, with general principles, ideas that stem from the Alexander technique that I can really teach in a group setting. So just basic concepts, sometimes maybe anatomy, sometimes just patterns of movement like sitting, standing, moving, and helping in those bigger classes, in a general sense, really promoting the idea that we can begin to observe what we're doing in ourselves and begin to identify our patterns and our habits. But then the really great thing at camp is that Bernard had the foresight to have these, what we call mini lessons. So then we have, for each individual camper, everyone gets 2 mini lessons. And this is where you really get to the heart of the Alexander technique, because it is an individual process. So in those mini lessons, I get to really see, either I'll focus on an issue that's very important to the individual horn player, and if they don't have anything in mind, then there's plenty to work with in talking about posture, talking about breath, talking about what are the challenges of playing the horn specifically, heavy, asymmetrical, how is it carried in the case, all these things that add up to an impact on the body. And for some of particularly our more inexperienced campers, they might not even have any idea, right? The chair you're sitting in, how does that add up over time? So group classes and individual lessons in some ways are similar themes, but in the mini lessons, which is really a brilliant part of our curriculum, you get individual hands-on, meaning actual feedback. So working with a student playing to see what's going on when they're playing the horn.
It feels like, I think that is one of the unique things that camp has to offer that I don't see in any other summer institute, not to toot our own horn here, but it makes so much sense to incorporate that mini lesson component, because we do that in every other musical thing. There's no way that if someone was learning to play an instrument through group lessons alone, like what are you gonna do?
And again, Nikki, I know it's insightful. I mean, it's not always obvious that folks put this all together, but it's something I say. I teach at the College of the CCPA, the College of Performing Arts in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I was saying this to my class the other day. It really is the whereby that we teach music. So applied lessons are part of the musician's life. And my work is often that translation too. it isn't necessarily incumbent on the instrument teacher, the horn teacher, to necessarily have the answer about the body. They might. They might be experienced enough to know what exactly is going on with that person's posture, what's going on with their breath, what are the issues, but that is what we specialize in. So we're kind of like, I feel like, we're just on the bench, we're sort of the bench men and women of the Alexander technique that can come in, lend a hand, literally, and help improve that learning trajectory for an artist. And it's a wonderful combination to both be learning your instrument and your technique, and then gaining access and refinement, poise and freedom through the Alexander technique to do that very thing more efficiently, and in essence, to do it better.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I just don't think I've ever thought about it for a long period of time, but, there's no way that you would be able to learn anything without one-on-one instruction, one-on-one feedback. I mean, every person is so different. Right. And I mean, in music, I can't think of anything where we're like, oh, you just have a couple group lessons and call it a day.
Right. No, it's absolutely the model. I mean, it is that transmission of actual information, and really looking at what an individual person is doing, which for me is one of the it's such a great honor to teach at KBHC, because every summer I look back at the photographs. Sometimes, I'll ask my students, can I take a photo of that? I mean, there are so many different combinations. We all have, in essence, sort of the same pieces and parts, but the way the whole comes together for every single person. So unless you're looking really at that individual and having that time to see, well, what's going on? How can I help that individual person coordinate more fully and more efficiently? So it's a really, and all the group work is a great way to impart information, to get people on the path. So I never negate and I never underestimate the power of just being exposed, because, a really great thing is every year we have students that come back and, they'll get just sort of they'll get just a taste of the Alexander technique at camp, and then they come back and they tell me that they've gone out and they've sought out an Alexander teacher, they've sought out lessons. I also teach yoga, as you know, at the camp. I'm a registered yoga teacher, so we have campers that then, it's a great combination to be thinking about how you're using yourself, not just when you're playing your horn, but of course this work, then it applies to everything. So the yoga is also a very beloved, it's become a beloved part of our time at KBHC, and it's a good combination for our campers too.
I'll go into one last question and then I'll let you go. I think that camp in so many areas offers these opportunities that we were just kind of talking about that are sometimes overlooked. When a camper is approaching camp for the first time, what do you think it's really important that they have in their mindset? What are the outlooks that would be really key for them to bring this summer if they're attending?
Right. No, so good. I would imagine that everyone on the faculty would have the same sort of response, but it's, to anyone coming, to just come as an empty vessel to learn everything you can. And the mindset of self-discovery and of curiosity, because as I said before, our campers might encounter things, especially for me, there are going to be people coming that have never heard of the Alexander technique, or maybe only heard of it in some particular context and thought, and maybe this was you, Nikki, you thought it's really not for me. No, it's sometimes those things that we don't know, that aren't familiar to us, we might not necessarily seek them out. So coming with a very open mind, with an open heart, with an idea with a sense of curiosity and of growth, because as you and I both know, every single faculty member has so much to offer. So there's really, it can become really, it's the question of, how to spend your time, because there's so many options, but so much to learn if we're open to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a fabulous note to leave off on. thank you again for taking the time to talk with me and everyone who may be listening. I really appreciate it. I think that's it. So thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Nikki. It's great to see you, and I'll see you again in June.
Yes, I cannot wait to see you there. All right.
Bye, everybody. See you at camp.
Bye.
Bye-bye.